was born in 1994. My dad raised me on WWE. I had pretty much watched majority of Raw, SmackDown, right up until about late 2007, early February of 2008. Precisely the second week of February 2008. I grew up hearing my dad's opinions of certain wrestlers, including his strong-formed opinion of Vince McMahon. My dad and his girlfriend absolutely despised the McMahon family. I grew up watching a lot of wrestlers absolutely abuse their bodies, their stage persona, and anyone that got in the ring. My dad also used to constantly remind me, that it's all fake. On stage, they have to do this, but backstage, they rehearse and probably are friends. But the things I watched, it never felt fake to me. Even as I watched this documentary, they constantly reminded that it's a storyline. That yes, that what we see is real, but in reality, it's a fabricated storyline, just as if I was watching a movie. I remember watching wrestlers committing murder-suicide on live TV. Now, let me loosely say live TV because once you translate it to Australian screens, it may not have been live due to Foxtel's airing rights. I remember the things that WWE did for ratings, which was sickening to my growing mind. I pretty much caught majority of the Attitude Era and the beginning of the next phase afterwards. I know that Vince McMahon has come forward saying this documentary altered his words, saying that audiences should take this with a grain of salt because none of this is him and none of this is the way that he wanted to be perceived. So I kept that with an open mind as I watched this documentary. First of all, I didn't realize how grovelly McMahon's voice sounds. Years of screaming in the microphone finally did damage to his cords. Wow. I do love the backstory that they give into Vince, how, he was raised in a trailer park with his mom, his stepdad, and siblings. Didn't know his dad for the first 12 years until they went, oh, hey, Dad. Guess what? My dad's like a millionaire, runs a wrestling company. I want to be just like you. Sounds like every other father-son storyline out there. And seeing that trajectory of how Vince became who he is today and how he replicated his father's legacy and twisted it into his own before ultimately stepping away from it all. By force, of course. It was really fascinating to see the way that Vince portrays himself, the way that he was always open and honest about wanting to create a spectacle for the audiences, the way that he wanted to control the narrative while also staying current with the media at the time. If society hated foreigners, that meant the wrestlers hated foreigners. If society wanted rebellious, that meant the wrestlers were rebellious. That's the whole point of the Attitude Era. When talks of steroids and concussions came forward, at first, and again, this discussion's still happening years later and will never end, at first wrestling was like, this is a load of crook, what the hell, before realizing, no, we should take safety as our main concern. I didn't realize that they took away a lot of the match props, so to speak. The chair was taken away. I'm assuming that elements of the cage fights were taken away as well because those caused more damage to the wrestlers. I didn't know about a lot of the lawsuits that this happened. A lot of them against WWE, specifically Vince himself, and a lot of women have come forward, which, I mean, with the characters that he's portrayed with in this show, in this documentary, that explains a lot. I mean, we've all talked about Donald Trump and his connection with Jeffrey Epstein, which, I mean, kind of relates to this, and the way that Vince can't differentiate between himself as Vince McMahon and himself as Mr. McMahon. You can see where the allegations lie. I mean, I grew up watching this sort of shit. Like, I know what it was like watching the women be seen as nothing but sex objects. I remember watching Kane and Leah, that storyline play out. She was just the doll between all these men being forced into marriage, be forced into desires, and just watching how it all fabricated and how I just never understood that as a kid. And then seeing how clear as day these wrestlers who are either A, retired from WWE, or B, have just stepped away just because they don't want to retire, but they also don't want to quite be in the ring as much, have all said that this is a man's world. Originally, wrestling was seen as something that you can let off some steam, be seen as, you know, watching women that would never think twice about you be ogled by the rest of the world, which makes sense, I guess. The one thing that I liked that they covered, but also kind of hated how they skimmed over it, is wrestling deaths. Wrestling deaths are never right. I remember Chris Benoit's storyline, unfortunately not storyline, but tragedy. I remember Eddie Guerrero's tragedy. I believe that there was also another one that aired. I want to say it was between Eddie and Ray, but I could be wrong. But that murder-suicide playing out live on TV, I remember that happening. And obviously sometimes accidents happen. Whether it be because they fell too high from a cage, or whether it be because, you know, one too many knocks to the head, whether it be because of natural causes that just happen to coincide with a hit. It's very tricky because it's between business and personal, and it's worse when it happens mid-show. Now, they do talk about how a faulty rig caused Owen's death. You know, they did gloss over Chris Benoit's death. They glossed over Eddie Guerrero's death. Wrestling and deaths, it shouldn't be seen as the norm, and it was fascinating that they tried to talk about how concussions happened, how, you know, the build-up of different emotions and the adrenaline just kind of caused this event, and how many lawsuits came from it as well. Watching this also play out made me realize how much I feel sorry for Shane McMahon, Vince's only son, because it feels like Shane is following in his father's footsteps. The way that Vince has never had his father's approval, never heard his father say, "I love you, I'm proud of you," and it basically felt like Shane was having to be like, "I'm your son, you need to acknowledge me as your son and not as some prop that you can use whenever you please." Whereas Stephanie is well, the second face of it all. I remember watching Stephanie when I was a kid as well, and how she was, you know, against her father but also for her father. I like I said already, a lot of the times it blurs the lines between Vince and Mr. McMahon. There are people who I'm assuming are still on the payroll who are like, there's a huge difference, whereas others are like, actually there's not a huge difference. After watching this, I don't think this is necessarily a manhunt against Mr. McMahon. I don't think it's a manhunt against WWE/WWF, but I rather see it as an open discussion on how everyone, including myself, who is no longer a wrestling fan, view this as entertainment. Yes, we see the entertainment aspect of people fighting each other in the ring for the grand prize of the championship bout, but we also see the other side of it where we learn about these lawsuits, we learn about these people, we learn about how there is so much more to know that we may not have known before. For me, I found it quite fascinating to sit through. I mean, at times it does feel quite long, but it is a documentary and they're trying to cover so much ground. They started filming this before the breaking news of the trafficking, the rape allegations, and then they continued it until earlier this year before this aired. But I love that they brought in a lot of different wrestlers. I love that they brought in certain wrestlers' families. I love that they just kind of tried to make it be like, yes, it's about wrestling, but it's also about human beings who just happen to wrestle. Now, unfortunately, McMahon has stepped aside, and it's kind of twisted the legacy of the way that his family business has gone. His family business is now a public entity owned by TKO, whereas the McMahon family are now like, we're not part of this, or at least public knowledge-wise, they're not part of it at all. For me, I found it fascinating. I hope other wrestlers do. Wrestlers, other viewers, sorry, too many words. But no, I can see that he doesn't know who he is anymore. He can't see Vince, the husband, the father, the difference between him and Mr. McMahon. It's completely blurred now. And it's kind of disappointing, but it's also quite fascinating to watch this play out in the public eye.